courtroom is no place for black kids to play lawyer." The words fell like a sentence without trial, but Elijah did not lower his head. He did not come here to beg for sympathy. He came to reclaim justice with truth and intellect. Chicago, early morning in midwinter. The city was immersed in cold. The melting snow left patchy streaks on the sidewalk, dark like the gray sky above. In people's hearts, the cold was even more intense, especially for someone like Elijah Carter. A 17-year-old black boy walked into the Cook County Courthouse in a faded old coat, holding a worn leather briefcase, his shoulders slightly hunched not from fatigue, but from the weight of everything he carried: truth, pain, and hope. No lawyer accompanied him, no press coverage, no one cared. Just a boy and a mother accused of welfare fraud, one of hundreds of cases crushed daily by the system. But today that machine would malfunction, and Elijah would be the stone lodged in the gears of what seemed like a flawless mechanism. At 8:14 a.m. in courtroom 3B, the room was packed. Lawyers, clerks, security, plaintiffs, other defendants, and even a group of students brought in for educational observation. Judge Franklin Whitmore entered, his long black robe trailing to his feet, silver-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, hair combed back like an old-school general. Everyone stood. The air felt dense, as if someone had pressed down on the entire room. Whitmore was famously strict, straightforward, and at times full of prejudice, though few dared to call it out. He once bluntly rejected a homeless man's appeal because his handwritten petition had spelling mistakes. The next case, State of Illinois versus Monica Carter, charged welfare fraud. A middle-aged black woman with frizzy, unkempt hair and trembling hands stepped in. She looked around confused. Where was her attorney? Then from the gallery, a boy stepped forward. Light from the window fell on his face, Elijah Carter. His eyes were bright, but in them lay a deep abyss of experience. He wore a white shirt, black tie, and an old blazer that was slightly too big in the shoulders. The room murmured. A few stifled chuckles escaped. Judge Whitmore looked down at his list, then looked up at Elijah. "I believe there's some mistake here." "No, Your Honor," Elijah stepped forward, standing tall. "I am the legal representative for the defendant under Section 18.3b of state law." Whitmore laughed, a cold laugh tinged with surprise and heavily laced with contempt. "You mean to tell me a black teenager not old enough to drink believes he's a lawyer?" He scanned Elijah from head to toe, as if inspecting a defective product. "Or are we witnessing an audition today for Little Street Lawyer?" Laughter rippled across the room. A guard snorted. A lawyer smirked. Elijah remained silent. No reaction, no bowed head. Whitmore leaned back on the bench. "Tell me, what inspiring speech do you plan to deliver today?" "I'm a poor kid who overcame hardship. Please don't send my mother to jail." Or perhaps, a son of the South Side fighting for righteousness? The words cut through Elijah's silence like a blade, but he continued to stand firm like a landmark in a storm. Except this landmark could speak, fight, and win. Whitmore sneered. "Very well, if you insist on being part of this play, I'll give you a chance. But keep this in mind, this is a courtroom, not a stage. If you play the wrong part, I won't just applaud, I'll shut the doors." He paused, then added, this time with a lower but clearly audible voice. "And you know, kids like you, we see them every day, a little clever, a little loud, but they all end up in the same place on the other side of the bars." The boy stood there, unblinking, expressionless. Elijah Carter calmly opened his leather case, took out a neatly wrapped folder, and placed it gently on the defense table. The courtroom fell silent. Someone seemed to realize this boy was not what they assumed. A young lawyer sitting at the back leaned over and whispered to his colleague, "He's not simple. 17, and he's got the presence of my law professor." Elijah looked up at Whitmore. His voice rose deep and steady, each word as sharp and clear as metal striking stone. "I did not come here to perform. I came to defend the truth and to prove that justice is not determined by age or skin color." He looked directly into the judge's eyes. "I don't need your pity, Your Honor. I need you to listen." Whitmore hesitated. For a brief moment, his eyes wavered. Then he looked away. No one laughed anymore. Elijah Carter, the boy who was mocked by the entire courtroom, had just made the most powerful man in the room take a step back. When prejudice speaks, truth must scream to be heard. 1:07 p.m. Courtroom 3, B, Cook County Courthouse. Unlike in the morning, the courtroom now resembled a stage awaiting its climax. Every seat was taken, the walls lined with camera lenses, and a few people were live streaming on their phones. A wave of murmurs swept through the room the moment the young black boy entered again, flashes from cameras shooting toward his face like bullets to the forehead. Elijah James, 17 years old, wore a simple white shirt tucked neatly into dark slacks. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing the calluses of youth forced to mature early. In his hand was a red folder, its cover worn, the paper edges warped from water and time. He looked at no one. He didn't bow his head. He didn't smile. He walked as if he had entered this courtroom 100 times before. Judge Whitmore entered in his familiar black robe. No more mocking, no sarcasm, only stillness. Cold, like ice. He struck the gavel. The court will resume proceedings in the case of James versus the Department of Social Welfare. Defendant Elijah James, do you have anything further to present? Elijah stood and raised his head. In that moment, the courtroom fell into a chilling silence. Your Honor, he said, calm and unhurried, I request permission to present the final piece of evidence for this case, a recording between Mr. Vincent Dale, the investigator assigned to this matter, and the Public Service Department of the Illinois Welfare Office. Langford, the middle-aged prosecutor at the opposing table, sprang to his feet like a coiled spring. Objection, Your Honor. This recording was not submitted in advance. It is inadmissible. Elijah didn't even glance at Langford. He slowly opened the red folder and pulled out a small silver USB drive. Under the Illinois Freedom of Information Act, all calls to the welfare office are internally recorded. I simply requested a copy, and in this recording, Mr. Dale, who initiated this case, said, Elijah looked directly at Whitmore, as if trying to pierce through the judge's aged eyes. Black folks always know how to work the system. They act like it's real. Don't waste time checking. The entire room fell apart. A woman in the audience let out a faint gasp. A young reporter dropped her pen. A camera trembled slightly. Judge Whitmore froze. No one knew if he was angry, stunned, or ashamed. Elijah didn't wait for permission. He plugged the USB into a laptop, connected it to the speakers. The audio rang out, clear and steady like the cold edge of a blade. No need to verify, buddy. A black mother on welfare with a Harvard scholarship? Sounds like a joke. Close the file. Push it to prosecution. These people are clever. Handle it quickly. The courtroom was packed, yet not a single person moved. The space froze in the moment when truth was finally heard. Elijah turned off the speaker. He said nothing. He simply looked toward the man in the black robe sitting in silence above him. The same man who once mocked him as a boy pretending to be a lawyer? The same man who smirked when Elijah said he would represent himself. Judge Whitmore abruptly stood. Court is in recess for 15 minutes. I need to assess the legal validity of this recording. He retreated into his chambers. The courtroom exploded. In the hallway, reporters swarmed around Elijah. Where did you study law? Did anyone help you? How did you discover the inconsistencies in the case file? Elijah answered briefly. I didn't study law in a classroom. I learned because life forced me to. When your mother is labeled a fraud, when the local paper prints her face like a criminal, when people call your house threatening to deport you, you learn the law. Inside the judge's chamber, Whitmore sat motionless at his desk. Before him was the hearing transcript. To his right was a document from 1994, one he had signed to dismiss a complaint from a black man for being based on emotional evidence. A single bead of sweat slid down his wrist. For the first time in his 30-year career, he felt uncertain. 15 minutes later, he returned to the bench. He sat still and struck the gavel twice. The court is adjourned for 48 hours. The prosecution and the Department of Welfare are ordered to submit all related emails, recordings, and documentation. Additionally, he turned to Langford. Mr. Vincent Dale, the investigator, is required to appear at the next hearing as a primary witness. Langford remained silent. his face pale. The courtroom buzzed. Some people clapped quietly. Elijah quietly packed his documents, buttoned his jacket. His mother stood at the back row, eyes red but smiling. That evening, in a small apartment on Chicago's South Side, Elijah sat at the kitchen table with a red pen in hand, continuing to mark items on a tax form. A 17-year-old black boy, an unofficial lawyer, a quiet warrior. His mother, Monica, approached and placed a mug of hot cocoa on the table. "Who are you planning to call as a witness tomorrow?" Elijah didn't look up. "Someone they all think is invisible, but who sees everything." Wednesday morning, courtroom 3B, Cook County. The room was packed. Not a single seat remained. The press had started to gather outside in the hallway. Every eye was fixed on one person, Elijah James, the young black teenager labeled arrogant, ignorant, a legal joke. Judge Whitmore entered, his black robe swaying lightly behind him. His face was unreadable today. No smirks, no trace of sarcasm, not even a hint of reverence, only coldness. Cold as ice. "The court will now resume. Defendant, do you have any new evidence previously submitted?" Whitmore's voice rang out. Elijah stood. He slowly unzipped his briefcase. His eyes no longer carried the fear from that first day. They were calculating and resolute. "Your Honor, I request to call a new witness, Mrs. Rosa May Collins." A hush swept over the courtroom. Langford shot up from his seat. "Objection!" he nearly shouted. "This witness was never listed. He added her just this morning. He's trying to pull a stunt." Elijah didn't blink. "I submitted the witness's name within the allowable time frame for submitting rebuttal evidence under Section 18, Article 4, of the Illinois Civil Procedure Code. I have the fax and email receipts submitted to the court clerk's office." Judge Whitmore frowned. "Can you prove that?" Elijah presented a printed email and the filing receipt, time-stamped clearly at 9:42 p.m. the night before. Whitmore exhaled heavily and raised his hand. "Objection overruled. Bring in the witness." The courtroom door opened. An elderly woman stepped in, stooped posture, wearing a dark brown coat faded with time. She was thin, her hands slightly trembling. Her eyes shone with something both hesitant and unshakable. This was Rosa May Collins, janitor at the Illinois Department of Welfare for over 22 years. Langford, now pale, whispered to his assistant, "If she tells the truth, I'm done." Elijah stepped forward. "Mrs. Collins, thank you for being here today. May I ask, have you ever heard Investigator Vincent Dale speak about this case?" She hesitated, then nodded gently. "Yes, I heard him talking in the records room on the 3rd floor. I was mopping the floor. He said, 'Reno, that little punk thinks he's a real lawyer? Just wait, I'll show him what this white justice system can do.' Then he laughed, a very cold laugh." The room froze. A quiet "oh" rippled from the spectators. Elijah asked, "Did you write this down?" She pulled out a wrinkled sheet of paper, an old cloth-bound notebook with the date, time, and detailed notes. Elijah took it and submitted it to the court. Langford sprang up again, more aggressively this time. "Objection! She's just a janitor. She has no legal training, no capacity to understand the context of the conversation. This could be fabricated," Elijah responded, each word deliberate and firm. "I'm not asking Mrs. Collins to interpret the law. I'm asking her to recount what she heard. That is the basic function of a witness." Whitmore hesitated. "What about proof she was there at the time? You mentioned camera footage." Elijah pulled a USB drive from his pocket. "3rd floor camera, March 18th, 10:47 p.m. I submitted the footage 48 hours ago. Please go to frame 2113. The tech officer cued the footage. The screen projected in black and white, grainy but clear enough to capture movement. The scene, Mrs. Collins entering the records room with a mop at 10:45 p.m. A few seconds later, Vincent Dale and a male colleague entered, standing in the corner, followed by audible laughter. The timing matched exactly with her notes. Judge Whitmore's expression darkened. He struck the gavel. "Witness Rosa May Collins is accepted. Her testimony will be recorded as legally valid rebuttal." Elijah wasn't done. He turned to Langford. "Mr. Langford, you once said I had no evidence. Today, the witness has spoken, the footage has confirmed it, and I have one more thing. He presented a printed email titled, Response from the Department of Welfare Confirmation of Vincent Dale's Internal Suspension. Langford flinched. What? Elijah continued. The department quietly suspended Mr. Dale for manipulating case files involving individual claimants. He has 2 prior civil suits, both settled out of court. The courtroom erupted. Someone murmured, "Oh my God." Whitmore rubbed his forehead. In his eyes flashed something no one could name: regret, disbelief, respect. No one could tell. Mr. James, he spoke slowly, voice lowering. I was wrong about you. I thought you were just a reckless child. I did not believe you because of your age, your skin color, and the way you walked into this room. But today I cannot deny it. You are one of the sharpest legal minds I have ever seen. Elijah gave a slight nod. He remained composed, but deep in his eyes there shimmered a trace of unshed tears. Afternoon, the final day of the hearing. The atmosphere in the courtroom was entirely different from the previous days. The audience sat in complete silence, holding their breath. The press had doubled in number. Journalists jostled for every seat, all waited for the conclusion to the story of the black boy who defended himself against the system. Elijah James stood there in his white dress shirt, tucked neatly. His old sneakers had been wiped clean. His eyes looked forward, his back was straight, and his hands rested calmly on the table. He was no longer a teenage defendant. He was someone reclaiming the honor of his entire family. Judge Whitmore looked down from the bench. James, do you have anything you wish to present before we deliberate? Elijah nodded. Your Honor, I have one final witness. But this is not just a witness. This is the reason I've been fighting. I would like to call Mrs. Diana James. The entire courtroom froze. Langford exhaled sharply, unable to hide his disdain. Another last-minute witness? Are you turning this courtroom into an emotional circus? But Elijah remained composed. This is not a performance. This is my mother. The courtroom doors swung open. A middle-aged woman entered. A light brown coat, a thin figure, hair falling loosely over one ear. Her eyes looked dazed but carried a faith that had been buried deep for far too long beneath layers of suffering. Elijah turned around. He smiled. For the first time during the entire trial, Diana James had once been head nurse at Mercy Hospital. 3 years ago, she had vanished following a psychiatric treatment period. Her records were lost, her complaints unanswered. Elijah, only 15 at the time, had to live alone, work jobs, and start searching for the truth. And now she stood here in front of the very system that had once buried her name in its internal procedures. Elijah guided his mother to the witness stand. Mom, it's me. They want to hear from you. Don't be afraid. She looked up and stared directly at Judge Whitmore. A long silence followed. Not a cough. No keyboard clicks. The packed courtroom suddenly felt hollow. I am Diana James. Her voice was hoarse from years of not speaking much. I was forced into a psychiatric hospital in 2021. No court order, no family consent. I tried to send letters, but no one replied. They said I was paranoid, that I was making up stories about my son, about my husband's death due to medical negligence. They told me to stay quiet if I wanted to recover. Elijah turned to the jury and spoke steadily. You see it now. My family was buried in organized silence. I once wanted to stay silent too. But my mother taught me one thing. You don't get to choose silence when you're carrying the truth. Langford still wouldn't give up. He stood. Your Honor, this witness clearly has a psychiatric history. Her testimony is unreliable. Elijah replied without missing a beat. I have her evaluation from an independent hospital. My mother is completely lucid, and I have a recording from the head nurse at Mercy Hospital confirming that Mrs. James was sedated without consent when she tried to access her husband's medical file. They did it to cover up a wrongful death. They needed her gone, and the system helped them. Judge Whitmore squinted. He leaned his elbows on the bench, taking a deep breath. Elijah stepped into the center of the courtroom and spoke slowly. I'm not just defending myself in this case. I'm exposing a power structure that has crushed the poor, the black, and the voiceless. My mother was silenced, my father was forgotten, and I was mocked. But today, I am no longer afraid, because truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be heard. The jury lowered their heads. Langford was silent, and Judge Whitmore stood quietly. I can no longer turn a blind eye. In over 30 years as a judge, I thought I understood justice. But today, a child has taught me that justice doesn't come from sitting up high. It comes from someone brave enough to stand, even if they stand alone. I will issue my ruling tomorrow morning, but whatever the outcome, Elijah James, today, you have already won. Elijah turned to his mother. He took her hand. They embraced, quietly, without dramatic speeches, but the courtroom was suddenly flooded with tears. The next morning, a light rain fell. Droplets slid down the courthouse window as if carrying the echoes of a trial no one could forget. The door of courtroom 7A opened. Elijah James walked in, still carrying his old leather briefcase, the one he called his armor. His gaze was calm, neither proud nor afraid. He knew this was Judgment Day, but to him the truth had already prevailed the day before. Across the aisle, Attorney Langford looked like someone who had just endured a storm. His expensive suit was no longer pristine. His carefully styled hair had shifted to one side. He looked at Elijah, not with contempt anymore, but with unease. Judge Edgar Whitmore entered. No one said a word. He placed his hand on the thick stack of case files in front of him, but his eyes paused longer than usual on Elijah, as if he was not just looking at a teenage boy, but at a conscience in the form of youth. He gently struck the gavel. The court convenes for the final hearing in the matter of Elijah James versus Mercy Medical System and legal representative Langford. After 5 days of arguments, evidence, witness testimony, and the deafening silence of the system, I have reached my decision. The courtroom held its breath. The sound of rain tapping against the window seemed to quiet, as if making space for the voice of justice. The court concludes that the defendants have seriously violated the plaintiff's fundamental rights, including the right to live with his legal guardian, the right to access medical records, and the right to receive legal protection in a transparent, non-discriminatory manner, regardless of race or social status. Elijah looked up, but he didn't smile. He simply took a deep breath. The court orders Mercy Hospital to issue a formal public apology to the James family. The court declares that the medical records of Mrs. Diana James were falsified and demands a criminal investigation into the parties involved. Finally, the court affirms that Elijah James is not only innocent, but has made a significant contribution to bringing the truth to light. The case is hereby closed. No one clapped. No one shouted. The entire courtroom stood in silence, solemn, respectful. Elijah turned to his mother. Mrs. Diana was crying. Tears streamed down her gaunt cheeks, no longer from anguish, but from release. As Elijah prepared to leave the courtroom, a voice suddenly called out behind him, "James, wait." Elijah turned. It was Judge Whitmore. He stepped down from the bench. For the first time in his entire judicial career, he walked away from the seat of judgment to stand beside the accused. "You've made me realize that justice doesn't always reside in our hands. Sometimes it rests with the young who dare to do what's right, even when no one stands with them." "I'm sorry." Elijah stood still. A judge, apologizing. It was not something often seen in any courtroom. "I'm sorry for seeing you as just another useless black kid. Sorry for letting bias guide my judgment. And thank you for not staying silent." Elijah nodded, gently. "I forgive you, but I won't forget." Langford quietly packed up his files. On his way out, he paused briefly in front of Elijah. "I used to think law was power. You taught me that law is also compassion. Good luck." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Microphones, cameras, flashlights blazed. A young journalist asked, "Elijah, what will you do next?" He smiled faintly. "I'm going to apply to law school, because I don't want to win just one case. I want to change the entire system. Never underestimate a soul just because their skin is darker than your gaze." A misty morning sky stretched over the south side of Chicago. No longer the weary footsteps drowned in sirens and honks. Today's sunlight gently touched the worn wooden window frames. The little house at the street corner remained as humble as ever, but something inside had changed. Elijah James, the boy once crushed by the system, now stood before the mirror in a dark navy suit. His tie was still clumsy, but his eyes shone like they carried the dawn of all the forgotten souls. In his hand was a letter, a single sheet of paper, yet it bore the weight of an entire new chapter in history. Congratulations! Yale Law School is honored to offer a full Justice Reborn scholarship to Elijah James in recognition of his exceptional courage and intellect that has redefined the world's understanding of justice. His mother, the woman who once only knew how to keep her head down. Diana James, once a thin and silent figure, lost in a sterile hospital room, now wore the white coat of a patient rights advocate within the very healthcare system that once erased her. She no longer lived in hiding. She lived to reclaim the voices of those who had once been like her. During a National Health Council forum, she said, "I once didn't understand that silence can be a crime, but my son taught me that if just one person dares to stand, even a wall of injustice can begin to crack." Has the system changed? The answer is yes, but not easily. After Elijah's case, Chicago's legal system was forced to reflect on itself. A new law named EJ 42 was passed requiring independent oversight for all minor guardianship cases. The city court established a new division, the Community Justice Unit, where volunteer lawyers assist vulnerable families. Elijah, through his mind and his pain, made the system bow. But he did not do it for revenge. He did it so those who come after him would never have to bow again, and even the one who once judged him. Judge Whitmore submitted an early retirement request after the trial. Many said he was pressured, others believed he was haunted. But at a speaking event at Columbia University, he stepped up to the podium, silent for a long moment, then said, "I used to believe power was what kept me in the seat above. But Elijah made me realize that sometimes those standing under the bench rise far higher than the courtroom itself." On a bright morning in New Haven, Yale Law School's campus glowed in the early breeze. New students bustled in. Among the faces full of anticipation was a young man with a worn backpack and a weathered notebook in hand. Elijah James entered the school gates with eyes that no longer held quiet resignation. He was no longer the black kid mocked in court, but Elijah, the only youth who ever defeated an entire biased system in court. A fellow student joked, "So you're here to become a lawyer, huh?" He smiled slowly and deeply. "Number, I'm here so that the kids who come after me won't have to stand in court alone like I did." A lesson etched into people's hearts. Never underestimate someone just because they are younger than you. Never look down on someone because their skin is darker than what you're used to seeing. And never forget, sometimes within the overlooked lies the seed of a human revolution. That evening, Elijah sat by the window, writing a line in his notebook. "I don't study to argue, I study to listen to those who have never been heard. I don't want to win, I want everyone to live as a human being, with dignity. And one day he will return to Chicago, not to retell the old story, but to teach, to write laws, to protect the children the system once abandoned. He will speak through the same eyes once dismissed. I am Elijah. I am proof that justice is not only for the wealthy, the white, or the powerful. It is for anyone who believes that the truth deserves to be heard."